April 1945. Berlin was dying. The capital of Hitler's thousand-year Reich was now a smoking ruin, its streets buried under rubble, its people starving, its once proud army reduced to desperate boys and broken men. And deep beneath those ruins, in a dark, claustrophobic bunker, Adolf Hitler was living out his final days, cut off from reality, surrounded by lies, loyalty, and death. This is the story of the last days of the Führer, a descent into madness, a kingdom collapsing from within, and the moment the world finally closed the book on its darkest chapter. By April 1945, Nazi Germany was finished. The Allies had invaded from the west. The Soviets were closing in from the east every day. The sound of Russian artillery grew louder in Berlin. But in Hitler's bunker, buried 30 feet below the Chancellery Gardens, time seemed frozen. Concrete walls 2 meters thick, narrow corridors lined with stale air and damp, generators humming, lights flickering, a place designed to protect, but also to trap. Inside, Hitler and his inner circle lived in denial. They still held meetings, issued orders, and moved pins on maps, as if the war could still be won by willpower alone. Outside, Berlin burned. The Soviet army, over 2.5 million strong, was closing in from all directions. Artillery shells shook the ground day and night. Civilians fled underground, hiding in subway tunnels. But Hitler refused to leave the city. He had once promised his people, "I will never abandon Berlin." Now, that promise had become his death sentence. Hitler was 56 years old, but looked decades older. His hands trembled. His face was pale and sunken. His voice cracked when he spoke. Years of war, drugs, and rage had destroyed his body, and paranoia had destroyed his mind. He still believed Germany could somehow turn the tide. He ranted at his generals, accusing them of cowardice and betrayal. He shouted at maps, drawing imaginary counterattacks that no longer existed. One of his secretaries later recalled, he was living in a fantasy, fighting armies that only existed in his head. In the bunker with him were about 30 people, his generals, secretaries, servants, bodyguards, and a few family members of top Nazi officials. Among them was Eva Braun, his longtime companion. She had refused to flee, telling friends, "I will stay with him until the end." She spent her days trying to bring some illusion of normality, dancing to gramophone records, chatting with secretaries, even sunbathing under a lamp to simulate daylight. But everyone knew the truth. The end was coming. Above them, Berlin was collapsing into chaos. On April 20th, Hitler's birthday, Soviet shells began falling directly on the city center. The once grand chancellery shook with every impact. In the streets, the remnants of the German army fought house to house. Teenage boys from the Hitler Youth with Panzerfausts. Old men of the Volkssturm defending street corners. They died in thousands. That day, Hitler held his final military conference. He looked at his generals, men who had once conquered Europe, and said bitterly, "The war is lost." For the first time, even he seemed to know it. But he would not surrender, not to the Allies, not to the Soviets, not to anyone. He would die in Berlin. As the days passed, the bunker became a tomb. The walls shook. The lights flickered. The air reeked of smoke, sweat, and despair. Outside, the city was being pulverized by Soviet artillery. Hitler spent his last week issuing meaningless orders, commanding phantom armies to attack divisions that no longer existed. He screamed at his generals, calling them traitors. He blamed everyone but himself, the people, the army, the weather, even fate. On April 22nd, he broke down completely during a meeting, slamming his fists on the table. He shouted, "Everything is lost! The war is lost!" "But if you think I will leave Berlin, you are wrong. I will stay here and shoot myself." The room fell silent. For the first time, everyone saw that the Führer, the man who had promised a 1,000-year empire, was already dead inside. From that moment, the bunker became a place of quiet resignation. The Nazi leadership fled the city one by one, Goering, Himmler, and others seeking to save themselves. Each betrayal drove Hitler deeper into madness. He accused Goering of treason. He ordered Himmler's arrest. He swore he would never be taken alive. Outside, the Soviets were only a few blocks away. On April 28th, Hitler received his final humiliation. He learned that Mussolini, his old ally, had been captured and executed by Italian partisans. His body was strung up in the streets of Milan. The news confirmed Hitler's worst fear. Capture meant humiliation. He would not let that happen. That night, he called his staff together. He dictated his last will and testament. In it, he blamed the Jews for the war, accused his generals of betrayal, and appointed Admiral Dönitz as his successor. Then he married Eva Braun after more than a decade together. The ceremony was small and quiet, the bride in a black dress, the groom trembling, exhausted, hollow. Witnesses said he looked like a ghost. Afterward, the couple shared champagne and a modest breakfast, their wedding and their funeral in one. The next day, April 30th, 1945, Hitler said his final goodbyes. He shook hands with his staff, thanking them for their loyalty. He told them to escape if they could. Then, shortly after 3:30 p.m., he retired to his private room with Eva Braun. A few minutes later, a single gunshot echoed through the bunker. When his aides entered, they found Hitler slumped on the sofa, a pistol in his hand, a bullet wound in his head. Eva lay beside him, dead from cyanide poisoning. The Führer was gone. The man who had plunged the world into darkness, who had dreamed of empire and immortality, was now just a corpse in a concrete bunker. His aides wrapped the bodies in blankets, carried them up to the garden, poured gasoline over them, and set them on fire as Soviet shells exploded nearby. It was over. 2 days later, Berlin fell. The red flag of the Soviet Union was raised over the Reichstag. Germany surrendered soon after. The war in Europe, the bloodiest in human history, was finally ending. In the bunker, only silence remained, scattered papers, broken furniture, the smell of burned oil and flesh. For weeks, Soviet soldiers searched the ruins, trying to confirm if Hitler was truly dead. His remains were secretly recovered and hidden by the KGB, a secret kept for decades. The world above began to heal, but the memory of the bunker lingered, a reminder of how absolute power ends not in glory, but in decay. Those last days were not just the fall of a man, but the collapse of an idea, a vision built on hate, fear, and lies. Inside that bunker, the myth of the Führer died, and with it, the illusion of the invincible Reich. In later years, one of Hitler's secretaries, Traudl Junge, reflected on her time there. She said softly, "We were so young, we wanted to believe. But in that bunker, we saw the truth. It was all madness." Another survivor said, "The bunker was the end of the world. The air was filled with despair, and no one dared to speak of hope." Today, the site of the Führerbunker is an ordinary parking lot in central Berlin. No monument, no sign of glory, only silence. The city that once worshipped a dictator has erased his final resting place. Tourists walk past, unaware of the ghosts that lie beneath their feet. but history remembers. The story of Hitler's final days is not one of heroism, but of delusion, destruction, and downfall. It is the story of a man who demanded worship, but died alone and unloved. Of a regime that promised greatness, but ended in ruin and shame. Of millions of lives lost, and one man hiding in the dark, clutching at the empire that had already slipped away. April 30th, 1945, a single gunshot echoed through the bunker, and with it, 12 years of terror came to an end. From the ashes of the Third Reich, a new world began to rise, scarred but free. The bunker was buried, the walls collapsed, but the lessons of those final days remain. Power built on hate will always destroy itself, and every tyrant, no matter how feared, eventually meets the same fate: silence, darkness, and dust. The last days of the Führer, inside Hitler's bunker, a story not of victory, but of the final collapse of evil.